of our 2025 nonprofit series powered by Hedges. At the National Bank of Indianapolis, we take pride in being the largest locally owned bank in our city, and even greater pride in the relationships we've built with over 30% of Central Indiana's nonprofit organizations. Supporting your missions and helping strengthen your impact is the heart of what we do. This training series was created with one goal in mind: to equip nonprofit leaders like you with practical tools, expert insights, and fresh perspectives to build a more sustainable future for your organizations. We are incredibly grateful for our partnership with Hedges. For over 2 decades, Hedges has helped more than 175 nonprofits, foundations, and corporations across Indiana and beyond to strengthen their strategy and amplify their impact. Today's session, Making the Ask, features fundraising expert Adam Clevenger. Whether you're brand new to fundraising or refining a well-established campaign, Adam brings deep knowledge and tactical guidance to help you ask with clarity, confidence, and purpose. We encourage you to join the conversation. Please drop your questions and thoughts into the chat throughout the session, and we're here to learn from each other too. Thank you again for being here, and let's dive in. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Jill. And thank you to the National Bank of Indianapolis. Thank you to Erin and Hedges for sponsoring today's event and hosting all of you. It's great to see some familiar faces and names. And I'm really looking forward to the next hour with all of you. Briefly, just about me, as Jill said, I'm Adam Clevenger. I'm a partner with Sternberg Associates based here in Indianapolis. We offer a wide variety of consulting services in fundraising, board development, and nonprofit management in general. A little bit about me. I have worked, prior to joining the LSA team, I worked for the YMCA, both at the national level as well as here locally, Hanover College and Timmy Global Health. I always find it interesting to know a little bit about the speaker as well. So I always include, I'm a history nerd. I have all the requisite skills and experience to demonstrate I'm a history nerd, and I love it. I'm proud hashtag girl dad. And yes, you read that correctly. I'm the owner of 2 COVID puppies, completely unintentionally. So they are luckily at doggy daycare today and not making noise in the background. So as I mentioned, LSA, we're a local consulting firm. We've been working since 1996 to deepen engagement of our nonprofits. You can find us online. You can email me. We're on all the social outlets. So if you have a question or want to have a deeper conversation about some of the topics we discussed today, I absolutely welcome the conversation. So making the ask. I want to start off with, why does it matter? Why do we care about making the ask? Well, we'll talk a little bit about what inspires donors to give, but for me, more than anything else, the reason why we focus on solicitation, making the ask, specifically to individual donors, as you see here from the data from Giving USA last year, 67% of all giving, $500 billion, was given directly by individuals. And of course, 8% came from bequests, which are who? Individuals that had made a planned gift sometime in their lifetime. And of course, those are the realized gifts after they've passed. And of course, as you all know, based off of relationships with corporate partners or foundation funders, you're often talking with individuals in that process. So solicitation really matters. Today, what we hope to cover, and I hope you learn, is how to prepare for the ask, how to ask. Everyone wants the script, and just so you know, don't expect a script, because there is no script. Every situation is a little different, but certainly can give you some pointers on how to ask. And then, of course, how to follow up. I think we will, as we'll talk today, so much focus, our mental, our emotional sense is developed in thinking about the ask itself. But as we'll explore, the ask is so much more. Well, actually, the ask itself is a relatively small part of an overall development process. I'll also say before we go any further, as Jill said, feel free to add questions, have a discussion in the chat. I'd like to think I saved enough time for questions at the end, but I can't always promise that. So if you have a question, please feel free to use that chat, especially if it's pertinent to the conversation that we're having at that moment. So why do people give? Well, first of all, most donors feel connected to the mission. Did they have a personal experience with your mission? Do they know someone else that's had a personal experience with your mission? Um, how do they feel connected to that mission? Maybe they have been a volunteer, a board member, a staff member. Maybe they have a friend who served in one of those roles, but they have some sort of connection to your organization and your mission. They believe, hopefully, that their gift will make a difference in some way. I often remind people that donors receive something from their gift. Yes, they get a tax receipt. Sometimes they'll get some sort of giveaway, but it's much more intrinsic than a tangible item. They have hopes and dreams for their communities, whether that's geographic or a particular type of person that they want to serve, or maybe it's animals, or maybe the environment. Donors have hopes and dreams for their communities, and they want to see a change occur. And the way that they can do that is by making a gift. When people, mainly volunteers, but even some staff, share with me that they're afraid of asking people to give, I often remind them, you're not asking for yourself. You're not even really asking on behalf of your organization. I frame it as you're asking on behalf of those who are unwilling or unable to ask for themselves. So, I think it's an important role that we play as fundraisers to connect donors who have hopes and dreams and our organizations and the communities that you serve, again, who have needs, and you get to bring those together. So I think when I reframe that, I think a lot differently about the ask. And of course, we know why people give is because, in fact, they are asked routinely, survey after survey, year after year. Donors respond to a question: why did you not give to insert organization name? And what we know through the work of Penelope Burke and many other people who do donor surveys is the number one reason why people don't give to an organization is because they weren't asked. And that's a failing on our part as the fundraiser. And we can't rely and depend upon our donors to always make that gift. We have to have an active role in that. So I'm curious, and feel free to use the chat. I'm curious, how do you view asking for money? So what emotion do you feel, or how do you approach it? What's that feeling that you have when you have to ask for money? So feel free to add in the chat how you feel when you have to ask for money. Nervous, reluctant. Let folks know that they're missing out. They don't give. Yeah. Anxious, sometimes awkward, right? Yeah. Oh, I love that. View it as an opportunity to create something together. Excited. That's right, Taylor. You're excited to ask people to support your mission. Absolutely. Part of an ongoing conversation. Yes. Making mission impact. A bit nervous, but genuine. I think what you'll find is people appreciate a little bit of nervousness or anxiety. It does convey that you're a genuine, authentic person. So I think that's fair. Passionate. Great responses. some people look like this, right? We heard this. They look like, oh no, don't make me ask for someone for money. Let me do anything else but that, because there's a lot of fear and anxiety that can be surround that ask. I worked, as I mentioned, for the YMCA for a number of years, and I had a membership director in a training, a staff training, and we're encouraging staff in all areas of the organization to solicit financial and or charitable support. And she raised her hand and she said, "I don't like asking people for money." Like, well, you do every day. As a membership director, you ask every single day. So it's just a matter of how we look at that. She saw that ask as, well, I ask them for money, I give them a membership card. And again, as I've already shared, that exchange occurs in philanthropic asks as well. So some people look at it like this: Lisa, and have some more, right? It's begging, right? And again, I think that's when we have to reframe that to remember that we are giving voice to a lot of people who can't use their voice and ask for themselves. So I really encourage people to think about that ask not as begging, not as a handout, but an invitation to partner with us to serve the community. Now, how do board members or perhaps even your executive director look at you as the fundraiser in the ask? It's just easy, right? Money just comes to you, because of our dynamic personalities in fundraising, or maybe there's a special script or incantation that we say to attract these dollars. That's not always the case, right? Certainly, there are really skilled fundraisers out there, but what I have found, even the most novice fundraiser can be very effective in making an ask when it's genuine and authentic. Um, so, what drives some of the emotions around asking? As the session description stated, the one of the words that causes the most fear in anyone's experience around asking is one of the shortest words in the English language, and that is the word no. That fear of rejection is a serious thing, and it prevents a lot of people from asking or being put themselves out there to ask. So being told no is a big inhibitor for people to ask. But again, we've always heard, or we've also heard from our donors, the reason why they don't give is because they're not asked. So what do we do? Um, I've also heard staff and volunteers say they feel unprepared. Well, again, that's on us to prepare, to do our research, and to go into those conversations with a plan. And we'll have some time to talk about that as well. So I mentioned overemphasizing that solicitation. The next slide will show it's just a blip in the overall process. Viewing money as a topic to be avoided. Um, I think actually someone in the chat kind of referenced this. We are taught as kids generally not to talk about money. My one business partner, Nick Parkovich, says, if to this day he doesn't know how much his father made when he in his career, because that was just a topic that he was taught not to discuss. So we can feel sort of like we're prying or we're seeking information that shouldn't be ours, but we have that hesitancy to talk about money because again, we've been taught not to. Sometimes we feel like we're imposing upon someone. We don't want to bother that person. In fact, most donors love your organizations. They love the mission. They would rather talk to you as representing the organization and learning how their gift is making an impact than probably do most other things in their day. So as we reframe that, I think that's important as well. And then finally, we feel again sort of that mentality of like we're begging. We're desperate because ultimately most of us in a paid fundraising position, we're having to fundraise for our salaries and the salaries of others. And sometimes that brings its own feelings and connotations as well. So, as I mentioned, a couple times already. I've put here, I have attempted here to show the relative time spent in the development process focus on the different phases of identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. As you see represented here, cultivation and stewardship, which just other words for relationship building, are really the majority of the time spent in the development process. Perhaps maybe as little as 5% of that relationship is focused on the ask. I've heard it said, and I could probably agree or disagree or define or debate the finer points of this. But what I've heard some folks say is if you do really well in the cultivation, the stewardship phases of this process, the ask is really quite easy. And I think that's certainly true to a lot of extent because if you're building those authentic relationships, you're getting to know the prospect, you're getting to know the donor, getting to know their interests. You're engaging them in ways that they want to be engaged with. And by the time the ask comes, it's frankly a lot easier. And of course, time is relative. So whether we're talking about an annual gift, a capital gift, or a planned gift, cultivation, the solicitation, and stewardship all really vary based off of that type of ask, right? Or that type of involvement. The IU Lilly School of Philanthropy, you know, back when I took PMP, even well, no, I was going to say several decades, really several years, but a couple decades ago, even then had developed this ladder of effectiveness, essentially to demonstrate what was the most effective way to ask. And everyone believes, the personal face-to-face is the most effective way. And I have to agree. And the less personal, the less direct, become less effective. And we see this from a cost benefit analysis and return on investment perspectives. But I always ask donors, volunteers, and staff to think about different ways that they were solicited. And I have them list out all the different ways they're solicited. And then I ask them to consider and reflect upon their most meaningful gift that they've ever given. Notice I say the most meaningful, not necessarily the largest. Meaningfulness and size of gift is not always equal. So then I asked them, how was that most meaningful gift solicited? Commonly, people respond, it was solicited by someone I knew. They told a really heartfelt, compelling story, and or I was already really involved in the organization. So I've learned over the last couple of decades of fundraising that regardless of the medium in which you solicit a gift, as long as it's personal, ideally by someone that the donor knows, telling a compelling story, and you've engaged them and involved them in your organization, any of these methods can be quite effective and leave a lasting impression, a lasting positive impression in the minds of your donors. So as we start to transition to the actual process, I want to consider us how we plan for the solicitation meeting. Because again, I believe that how we prepare for that can actually help us with all the anxiety that sometimes can be face around the ask itself. So I think of who, where, what, and why as some of the questions as I'm thinking through the solicitation. So who? Well, it's going to involve the prospect or prospects. It's going to involve the solicitation team, whether that's a staff and or volunteer, maybe multiple staff, multiple volunteers, but there's some sort of solicitation team. So those are our principal actors in this conversation. Why I put parentheses of around the S in prospect is we know again from the IU Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and the women's philanthropy that if we are approaching in a heterosexual couple, just the husbands, we're probably leaving a lot of money on the table because women are much more philanthropic than men. In most, again, heterosexual couples, they're making most of the giving decisions, in fact. So I know certainly when I started in fundraising, most of our prospect list only had the gentleman's name on it. And I have cautionary tale after cautionary tale of please engage both partners, both spouses in these conversations. One cautionary tale was an organization that we were working with, a gentleman, a significant donor passed away. The organization attempted to build a relationship and solicit a gift from the surviving spouse, and she said that was his thing. It wasn't mine. I don't really feel that engaged in this organization, and it's not something I really am concerned about, and feel like I need to give to moving forward. So disregarding whether that's a spouse or a partner or kids, now we're seeing multiple generations involved in some of these giving decisions. Avoiding those types of dynamics, you do that at your peril. So be thoughtful. One other thing I'll say at this point, and this will be a recurring theme throughout the rest of this presentation, when in doubt, ask your donor. As a consultant, talking through strategy about different prospects, our clients will ask us, well, should we invite the spouse? Should we invite the accountant? Where should we meet with this person? And I always fall back onto when in doubt, ask the donor. Hey, Jill, who else should be a part of this conversation? We'd love to talk with you about a gift that will support our ongoing mission with our organization. Who would you like to be a part of that conversation? Is that you as a spouse? Is it you and an attorney? You tell us. Where are you most comfortable in having this discussion? So again, when in doubt, ask your donor. Um, I also think about, again, who's the best team to be a part of that solicitation? Is that staff, as I mentioned, a staff and a volunteer, two volunteers, two staff? What does that makeup look like? I think it's important to base it off of the relationship. And in general, I like having a staff person and a volunteer, and this is why. One of the reasons why we involve volunteers and board members in our organizations is because they bring credibility, they bring relationships. They're not getting paid to do this work. So that, again, brings a bit of credibility, and they can convey their passion and why they support the organization. They don't have to be experts in the organization itself. That's why we have the staff person there. So oftentimes volunteers won't solicit gifts because they're afraid of not having all the answers. How will I remember how many kids we served last year, or how many sessions of summer camp do we run? I tell volunteers and board members all the time, don't worry about that information. You're not expected to know that. If a staff person is with them, they can answer those questions. If they're not, I always tell the board member, know who you can refer that question to. So you can say, Erin, that's such a great question. I wish I had that information, but as you know, I'm a board member and I don't know that level of detail. But Lindsay does. And I'll have Lindsay follow up with you next week or by next week with that information. So know who you can relay questions to, and that will be prompt in their follow-up. So Brittany had a question. What recommendations do you have when to include a board member on a solicitation team? Well, hopefully that answered that. If the board member has the relationship, I often like for them to at least be aware that that their friend or their contact is going to be solicited. Oftentimes when we're doing identification activities with board members, I always say, on behalf of the clients, they're not going to reach out to them or cold call them without your involvement. And I think that's important because when board members start to give names in that identification process, there's a lot of fear there too. What are they going to do with my friends' names? How are they going to approach them? So I try to involve board members as much as possible in this process. I also like how, you're welcome. I also like that it models how they should then solicit other people. And sometimes that even starts with how we solicit our board members. Are we just passing pledge cards out at around the boardroom, or are we just, putting a QR code on the screen for them to scan and say, "Hey, give us your gift"? Well, what we know, how board members are solicited, they generally then will turn around and solicit their prospects in the same manner. So if we're sitting down with them, sharing the story, asking them questions, they will model that behavior when soliciting their friends and contacts. Again, remembering that the solicitor, you're just the connector. You're just a story. I say just. I shouldn't say just. You are a connector. You are a storyteller. You get to connect hopes and dreams with needs, and you get to tell the story of the people that you serve. And I think that's really important. Question of where. This always comes up when we're thinking through where's the best place to meet with a prospect. Again, I typically like to ask the donor or the prospect, where is most comfortable for you to have this conversation? Sometimes they may say at home, my office, which I really enjoy because I get to see different mementos that they may keep or different things that could be conversation starters. So I like being on essentially their turf, but asking them always a priority. I tend to avoid coffee shops and restaurants to avoid distractions or places with loud noise because, again, we're having a conversation here. We don't want to get distracted by people coming to the table, or many of you are here in Indianapolis and you can't go to a coffee shop without running into 15 different people that you know. And generally, that's a great thing. We have a wonderful community here, but you don't want to have people coming up to you as you're trying to solicit a gift. An alternative might be, where does it, what location would demonstrate your organization's impact? Is that taking them on a tour? Summer's around the corner. Many of you are going to host summer camps. Is it inviting them to a tour of the summer camp experience and then taking them off to the side and having a conversation about what they just saw and telling a story and asking for the gift then? It's going to be pretty meaningful if they've had that experience. So what types of information do we need to know before we even invite the donor to a conversation? Well, we need to understand some information about the prospect or the donor's interest. Do they care? And again, work for the YMCA. We literally could give anything from A to Z, from aerobics to Zumba, and trust me, every letter in between. So that's very difficult if we don't know anything about the donor's interest to convey the entire alphabet of programs that the YMCA offered. So knowing some information about them, having conversations with them in the cultivation stage will help us identify their interests, where they've given to in the past. Are there other organizations similar to yours that they have given to, or even dissimilar? All that information gives you some clues and cues about what types of stories, what types of questions to ask, and ultimately what to solicit. Um, what um, what program priorities do you have? What are your own strategic initiatives that you're trying to fund? That's also equally as important. Again, YMCA A to Z. Well, if we're approaching this as a one size fits none, as I often describe them, we may not get the most impactful gift if they feel like it's going one place when really our strategic priorities are in a different area. We run in this a lot of times with capital campaigns. If that's the pressing initiative at the time, it's important to talk about that capital campaign, and I always encourage folks to solicit both capital and annual at the same time. Again, based off of my Y experience, capital campaign built many Ys around the country, but it's those annual dollars that actually gets kids in the pool and gets seniors active in our gyms and so forth, and all the different examples after that. And then finally, in the what, gather a story of impact. And ideally, the board member has had some sort of story. This is why mission moments at board meetings are so important, or sending stories to your board members and your volunteers by email, posting them on social media, because you never quite know what's going to stick in the mind of a board member in that situation. But of course, I like to plan those out. So, might share that with them in advance based off of the donors or your knowledge of the donor. And then why? Why are we meeting with them? It seems pretty obvious, but it's not always the case. Are we asking for feedback? What's your impressions of this program? What's been your experience as a donor so far? What are your hopes and dreams? Where do your hopes and dreams align with our strategic plan? All those are questions around feedback. And sometimes the solicitation might be a solicitation about feedback. Oftentimes, a feasibility study leading to a capital campaign is a cultivation, essentially a cultivation step where we're asking for feedback, hoping that the old fundraising mantra of ask someone for a gift, they give you feedback. If you ask them for feedback, they give you money, right? That's so understanding what you're actually asking is important. Are you asking for a gift? And in most contexts of a donor, we are. Though I could go off on probably another whole hour on direct mail solicitation and how organizations unfortunately confuse donors by multiple asks in each direct mail. We need to avoid that in our personal asks as well. Or are we asking for involvement? I would love for you to see this program or join a committee or join a board. So defining what are we asking is really important. Jason included in the chat, interested in how you ask for annual fund and capital campaign at the same time. Again, I think it's looking at or sharing with the donor or the prospect. We have a need for a new building or a renovated building or an extension, whatever the capital piece is. And this is the need, and this is the hoped for outcome of that capital expansion or capital need. But it's your annual dollars that ensures that the organization is there every day to actually provide the services. Ultimately, donors get to choose, right? Donors drive all of this. So if they say, Jason, I'd love to support this project, I will give you a gift of X. And they may say, you do with it. I trust you. You do with it what you will, where it's most needed. You may say that that is a capital campaign gift entirely, but you may also then decide that a part of that needs to go to annual. It also depends upon the level of giving as well. Some donors, I think you could easily ask for a specific amount around the capital as well, in addition to, and even say, in addition to your annual support of X. And sometimes, certainly we advise our clients in most cases to actually on that capital campaign pledge form have both the capital and annual amounts listed on the form. So I try to do dual asks in all of those capital asks because again, we have to have those annual dollars as well. So Jason, happy to have further conversation if you want to talk a little bit more about that. So as this slide says, what Jerry Panis taught me. I had the benefit before Jerry passed a number of years ago to attend a multi-day training on major gift gifts from Jerry Panis and Bill Cernovit in Chicago. I carry the book, if you can see it. I carry the book with me, and I refer a lot of people to use the book quite a bit. I still find this. I don't actually know when it was copywritten, probably in the 90s, if I had to guess. Um, but and back when Jerry was doing his fundraising, you'll see some of the examples all by letter, right? So not emails or phone calls, but all by letter. So again, the medium changes, the content does not. Um, I think it's important. Some of the lessons I learned, and I think this is also an important book to share with board members and volunteers and staff. This would be a mandatory read for anyone coming into a development office, for me at least, and certainly it's helpful for volunteers. But three things that really stood out in this book, and I encourage you, and you can find it at the library or some community foundations may have a copy of it. So find your local resources that have this, or find a local bookstore and order it through them. But getting the meeting, one of the best books for this, and there's some really great examples, and he covers a lot of different different types of meetings. But one thing that I've always carried in those conversations is when I reach out to a donor or a prospect to ask for the meeting, I followed his advice. I always say, I want to accomplish three things in our meeting. One, I want to thank you for your past support, assuming that they are a past donor. I want to demonstrate the impact of your previous gift. And finally, I want to invite you to consider your next commitment. I think oftentimes we feel like there's this silent dance that has to occur between fundraiser and donor, and that they don't quite know what we want or we expect from them. We know donors are smart. Donors are savvy. They know why you are reaching out to them. And I think many of them appreciate the honesty. Yes, I'm going to ask you for a gift. And sometimes it even hedges them when, no pun intended, Erin, but it kind of hedges that conversation around, well, what are you asking, or what do you want? Why do you want to meet? Well, if this is about asking for a gift, I don't have time for that. Well, if you acknowledge that immediately, it kind of reduces the defenses. So that was one thing. Another thing that Jerry was just masterful in is handling objections, listening to the objection, truly listening to what the donor is trying to say with that objection, and responding in a thoughtful manner that acknowledges their objection, but also then provides the answer of how to respond. And we'll talk about some of the common objections. One thing I know about objections too, and this is why I include this in sort of the planning phase of this, is there are some frequently asked questions that donors will always ask you. There are common objections that donors frequently will pose to you. Those shouldn't be a surprise to you, right? So in anytime that I'm planning out a solicitation based off of my knowledge of that donor or just in general, I try to think through what are those objections that they may pose so I can actually have a response and practice it. So that's again why I include it here. Also, Jerry, I think whether he developed this or someone else, but he would often say, and of course we hear this too. No doesn't mean a no forever. At least in most cases, no does not mean no forever. Jerry defined that a little bit further to say no is really an opportunity to ask questions around: is it the amount that you're asking for, or is it the timing? Could be both, but knowing the difference there, and following up with questions to identify, is this a question of that's just a lot of money as an amount, or is it a question of timing and we need to come back to the donor later? So how you handle those different things, again, thinking about those in advance is really helpful. So I receive no benefit or royalties or anything from Jerry's estate. So not getting paid for promoting his book, but it's a resource that I found very useful, and I again still use it today. Now 20 some years into my career. Okay. So the ask. The actual meeting. What does it look like? How does it feel? We've talked a lot about it. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there is no script for this. There's nothing you can hand to a volunteer or a staff person or even maybe your boss to say, here, follow this script, ask these questions, say these things, do these motions at these different times that will lead you automatically to a gift. There is, however, an outline. So I've shared an outline. There are many outlines out there, but this is an outline that I developed when I was working with volunteers in the YMCA. Um, I would sit down with a volunteer and plan out that solicitation, and I would follow the, like I said, I would follow this outline. So the opening, fairly brief. This is where you're doing introductions, building a rapport with the donor. Maybe if you're meeting at their office or house, you see a picture of a recent vacation, finding some common ground, right? This is oftentimes when, again, if a volunteer and a staff person are going together, the donor or donors may not know both of the people on the solicitation team. So it's an opportunity to establish that rapport among the group. I have certainly seen folks spend a lot of time in the opening and never really move through the rest of this. It's very easy to get caught up into the rapport building and ground, common ground finding that you don't actually move on to the purpose. Again, when there's a staff and a volunteer, it's really incumbent upon, I think, the staff person to be mindful of this outline and cause these transitions. So at some point, have to transition to, well, the reason why we invited you to meet with us today was, and what I do is I reiterate what I included in my initial invitation of today. I hope to accomplish that. I thank you for your gift, or we thank you for your gift. We can share how your last gift made a difference, and hopefully, will earn your renewed gift this year, or I will invite you to support a new strategic initiative, or I'm going to invite you to support our capital campaign. So I reiterate that again, full transparency here. I think it's really important. Don't shy away from, as I mentioned, stating that you're going to invite them to support a gift. This is the time that you talk about the project, whether that's a capital campaign or the initiative around your annual fund, or maybe you have a new strategic plan. This is the time where you are talking through what you hope that they will support. At this time is also the time to ask open-ended questions. This should be a conversation, not a presentation, not a webinar. I'm not doing a great job of modeling that, I guess, but this should be a conversation. So asking some open-ended questions, and I have some of those that I typically use later in the presentation. A volunteer often will share their commitment. Of why did they support the organization? This is also a time when comfortable and when appropriate, a volunteer or board member may share either the specific amount that they've given to a project. We see this a lot of times in capital campaigns, or just share, look, this was a personal, meaningful gift that I made to this project, or this is one of the top 3 philanthropic interests I have for the next couple of years, or in some contexts, this was a sacrificial gift that I made to the organization. A couple of things. One, that signifies that the level, again, sacrificial is relative, but it talks about the commitment that we're looking for, and also conveys to the donor or prospect that the solicitors themselves have made their gift commitment too. So they're not asking the donor for anything that they haven't already done themselves. It's an important piece. Again, it's also an opportunity for those that are on the solicitation team to share stories about why they give. I support this organization because of fill in the blank, right? And then we move, and again, the bulk of the time, bulk of this visit, regardless of how much time you have, is really in this purpose and sharing the commitment. I've presented these all sort of equally here, but there are different timings for this. And again, ultimately, the ask is a relative short period of time in this overall meeting. At some point, you have to be able to say, would you consider joining me in making a gift of X? Or will you join me and make a gift of X or support this organization? Yes, I'm saying a specific amount. Hopefully, we've done our research to know what the donor is likely to give or has the capacity to give, and gives them something to respond to. What I really as a fundraiser, I always get nervous when a board member or a donor I'm asking says, well, just, count me down for whatever I did last year. I don't know that we've shared the story well enough then, if that's the case, because we all know it. We read the newspaper or we read the news all the time, and we listen to the news that most time expenses have increased, staffing costs have increased, program supplies have increased. So we need to be conveying those stories of that your significant gift last year doesn't go as far as it will this year. So we need to be able to tell that story. But in that ask, I try to, in almost all cases, have a specific amount. Again, it gives them an anchor, gives them something to reflect upon and respond to versus sort of an open-ended. Sure, I'll give, and you leave it completely up to them, and then you feel disappointed. In that planning phase of the solicitation, I always set an amount that I hope to get, and then what's the next level that I'm okay with? I have a fallback because in the discussion, as we move on to next, if they say, "Oh, that's a lot of money," you're right, and I honestly would not be asking you for this amount of money if it weren't important, and if I didn't know what I know about you and trust that you can be a leader in this effort. But I would really love for you to consider this gift, and then if they're, this is a lot of money, well, have you considered pledging it? We can accept pledges over a couple of years. If this is an annual, we have all year for you to consider. We can do a monthly reminder, or you can do a monthly gift to split it up, right? So understanding, is this a question of amount or timing, is really important. So following up with those questions is critical. But again, you often don't know if that's the case until asking for a specific amount. And then finally, the close, after you've had discussion and to determine, answer all the questions the donor may have, determine is this a timing or an amount question, or maybe they've said yes. Obviously, sharing genuine appreciation at the close, confirming the gift, whether that's a pledge form or saying, hey, I'm going to follow up with an email, just outlining what we've discussed, and please respond to that email as appropriate to confirm, and then discussing the next steps. I have a one point later on. I'll talk about next steps. As I mentioned, I have this guide, and we'll send this guide out to you that outlines who the donor is, who's involved on the solicitation team, what's the ask, and here are the steps, and also who's going to do those steps. I warn you, because I've had lived experience of this. It doesn't matter how much you plan this out with your solicitation buddy, they can go rogue. So again, as the staff person, it's incumbent upon you to keep them either on task or you take over the timeline, which was my experience. Board members said, "Hey, I want to introduce you. We walked through this. We planned it out. We get into the meeting, and the gentleman goes, 'Well, this is Adam. He's going to take it from here.'" Oh, okay. Well, forget all those points that where he was going to talk. So it's important for you to think through these pieces in the strategy as well. As I mentioned earlier, asking open-ended donor-centered questions. I've listed a link here to a Bloomerang blog post with 23 questions. Some of these are from there, some I've taken from other places. If I ask no other question, I always ask, why did you first give to our organization? I ask that in solicitation. I often ask that in stewardship. When I call a donor to say thank you, I'm like, hey, Emerald, well, I'm curious, why did you first give to our organization? And I will say that question, more than the rest of these, or probably any other question I've asked donors, tells me the most, because then it taps into that memory, that emotion of why they first made that gift, and they kind of tell you the story of their giving, and it's just really a fun, um, info-rich experience to ask donors that question in particular, but many of these other questions as well. Of course, please. Maybe not in the meeting. Sometimes I'll do it in the meeting, but definitely immediately after the meeting. Write down as much of that conversation, the answers that you can remember, write it down, put it in your CRM so future fundraisers can have that information as well. But I encourage you to ask those open-ended questions. We've talked a little bit about handling objections. Again, anticipate and plan those responses. An FAQ, especially if you have a more complex organization or a lot of different programs. Maybe you prefer donors to give a particular way versus another. How is a volunteer, especially, supposed to handle questions around those things? And you can prepare them. I also prepare volunteers through role play. I love uh, getting volunteers and even staff to practice these things, um, and be more comfortable with it. Again, we talked about some of these objections and what you could respond with. So planning those out, and again, remember, when in doubt, ask. Um, I also, at this point, want to also share a brief story about a time where I did not ask. I was working for an organization. I had scheduled a meeting with the prospect. The organization expected me on every single visit to ask. I called my colleague right after the meeting, and she asked me, "So, how much did he give?" And I said, "Well, I didn't ask." "What do you mean you didn't ask? You were sent there to ask." I said, "Well, I started asking him questions about his relationship with the organization, and I could tell there were some really, he was frustrated with the organization, and it just wasn't an appropriate time to ask him for a gift. I would have been told no and probably never had that door left open for me in the future. So I did not ask. I listened. I acknowledged his concerns. I reported back those concerns to my colleagues, and I also offered to him opportunities for him to engage with the organization today. The issues he had with the organization, I wasn't a part of the organization at the time, and really no one in leadership was either. But that donor had that that emotional hiccup of why he was not going to support the organization. So I invited him to come and see the organization today and experience it today. He ended up months later making annual gifts and since capital gifts to that organization, because sometimes the best strategy is throw the plain strategy out the window and pivot. So there's always the opportunity to follow up and connect with someone. And in terms of follow up, and admittedly, I'm going to show my age and see if there's anyone else today's call that knows this. I remember this show from staying at home in the 80s and 90s on sick days or whatever. But this is Columbo, his famous line, "Just one more thing." That's when you knew Columbo had his person, right? When he would come back and say, "Just one more thing." Follow up is critical in all these conversations. Again, following up immediately with a thank you message, whether that's an email or phone call or even a handwritten note. Deliver on any promised follow-up items. You said that Lindsay was going to follow up with them to give them the programmatic information that you didn't have. Make sure that you communicate that to Lindsay and that Lindsay has a deadline to respond back to that donor in a timely manner. Demonstrating to your prospect or your donors that you follow through is the quickest way to establish credibility and a strong relationship with your donors. And again, I always attempt, whether this is in the cultivation, solicitation, or stewardship phase of the process, to schedule the next step in that process. And trust me, I'm thinking about the prospects a couple steps ahead. I always try to schedule that next follow-up before I leave the current time. Because we all know what happens. As soon as you part ways, they check their phone, they get caught up in email, they forget, and the whole idea of, well, just circle back with me in a couple of weeks and we'll find a time. Well, then you have summer breaks and vacations and school's going to start, and then it's the holidays and then it's spring break, and then you're back a year later and you haven't gotten together. So I never, well, at least I rarely go to the next, leave that step without planning the next one. And that could just be, hey, I'm going to follow up in a couple of weeks and invite you to this really cool event that I think you will enjoy. Or, hey, what are you doing on this date? There's a tour that I would love to invite you to. Again, always thanking them, demonstrating impact, and deepening the relationship with those donors. As I wrap up, and unfortunately left only about 4 minutes left for questions, which I will answer. I always think about this. Philanthropy is not about money. And that's kind of odd coming from a fundraiser, right? Philanthropy is not about money. Philanthropy matches, as I mentioned, those donors' hopes and dreams that they have for their community with those community needs. You get to be a facilitator of that. You get to be a connector and a storyteller. That's it. Nothing else. And as Case Sprinkle Grace, another longtime fundraising guru, says, donors don't give to you, they give through you. And if there's not a better ending message, I don't know what it is. So again, donors don't give to you, they give through you. With that, I'd love to open it up, see if there are any questions, or Jill, you can close us out.
If you have any questions to ask those of Adam, we'll give you a couple minutes before we close out. All right, we'll have Adam stay on for a couple extra minutes, but I'll close this out, and feel free, like I said, to stay on if you have remaining questions. I want to thank Adam for sharing his expertise and practical insights with us today, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking time out of your busy days to join us. We hope you found it very valuable and inspiring as you continue to strengthen your fundraising efforts. We hope to see you again for session 3. Please mark your calendars for Monday, September 9th at noon. This next session will focus on working with the media, featuring Jen Diswater, partner in crisis community relations at Borshoff. So keep an eye out. Registration will open via Eventbrite about 4 weeks in advance. Until then, thank you again for all the work you do in our community, and we're so proud to support you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jill.
Can we get a copy of the slides?
Yes, we will be making the slides available, as well as that solicitation outline.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.